Hey, Buddy Melon here. Today we're going to talk about why you've been aiming wrong your entire life and how to fix it using a tilted sensor. Now, many of you probably haven't ever heard of a tilted sensor or sensor tilting as the feature is commonly known as, but as its name implies, this feature allows you to adjust your sensor's angle by varying degrees, shifting the angle at which your physical movements are translated into in-game movements. And when calibrated properly, a tilted sensor can not only improve your aiming accuracy and consistency, it can also improve your grip's ergonomics. So in today's video, we're going to discuss all the benefits of sensor tilting, and I'll walk you all through how this feature works, what might support it, how to properly define your natural grip angle, how to properly acclimate to a tilted sensor, and we'll go over alternative methods of using a sensor tilt, and most importantly, we'll talk in depth about how sensor tilting can fix your aim even after years of compensating for fixed angled sensors. But before we dive in, if you enjoy the video and want to see more deep dives like this one, be sure to leave a like and get subscribed to the channel, and if you want to support what I do here on the channel, consider becoming a channel member. And as a quick disclaimer, it is imperative that you calibrate your sensor tilt to your specific hand size and grip style, as the degree of a user's tilt will vary depending on several factors. So just because a pro player uses a -7-degree tilt in their mouse, for example, does not mean that you should use that angle, as if it's different from your natural grip angle, using it can have some severe detrimental effects. So if you're going to try out sensor tilting, take the time to manually calibrate your sensor angle for the best experience. Alright, and with that out of the way, let's get right into today's video, talking about how you've been aiming wrong your entire life and how to fix it. Now initially, many of you probably think this feature seems like a negative, as the tilted sensor would add inconsistency to your aim, right? Well, as it turns out, every mouse you've ever used already negatively impacts your aim, as their fixed angled sensors already add inconsistency to your aim since the sensor's angle is offset from the angle of your grip. But since fixed angled sensors have been the norm since optical sensors were implemented into mice, we've just grown accustomed to the inconsistencies caused by them. So despite the theoretical negatives of sensor tilting, in reality, a calibrated sensor tilt does the inverse of what you'd think it would do, as it removes the inconsistencies we've all grown accustomed to, resulting in not only improved accuracy and consistency, but also improved ergonomics. Now, the concept of sensor tilting and the negatives of a fixed angle sensor haven't really been considered much in the past, since all mice have used fixed angled sensors for almost 2 decades now, and the inconsistencies caused by them were just considered the norm until recently. Because of this, we've all learned to compensate for these inconsistencies, and this has become a core part of how we all aim, to the point where this compensation has become an unconscious response as we've been doing it for so long. A great example of this is that if you open Paint and move your mouse back and forth horizontally, you'll notice that your mouse's movements are angled somewhat, and if you look closely, you'll notice your movements aren't straight, and they have a slight jumpy or jitteriness to them, as you're unconsciously physically adjusting your movements to try and keep your movements even or straight, due to the mouse's sensor not being aligned with your grip angle. Whereas if you use a sensor tilt that aligns its sensor angle to your grip angle and repeat the same test after you've acclimated to the sensor tilt, you'll notice that horizontal movements, and all other axis movements for that matter, are much smoother, being more aligned with the axis you move them on, and your movements will lack the jumpiness or jitteriness we saw in movements with the unaligned sensor. Now, the reason behind this improvement is all due to the calibrated sensor angle, which equalizes the range of the motions and the respective angling between your arm and your wrist and your mouse itself. This allows physical movements to be translated more fluidly and naturally into in-game movements, making your aim smoother and more consistent, while also removing the need to compensate for the unaligned sensor. And as I alluded to earlier, sensor tilting can also address strain and tensioning as well as other ergonomic issues, as on unaligned sensors, users will need to physically compensate to stabilize movements, which is often done by a user tensing their grip on their mouse, which in some cases and over long-term use can result in strain or tensioning issues as well as other negatives. But with a calibrated sensor tilt, since you no longer need to physically compensate, the frequency and severity of said issues is significantly reduced, and in turn the ergonomics of your grip will also improve, allowing you to use your mouse for longer in one sitting without fatigue issues. But to be clear, using a sensor tilt will initially cause a lot of inconsistency, as you have to essentially relearn how to aim, and you have to learn to not compensate for the unaligned sensor, which can be difficult as we've all been doing so for so many years, almost 20 years in my case. But after a few weeks of acclimating, you'll start to notice some significant improvements, not only in terms of in-game performance but also physically, and we'll talk more about this acclimation period and what to expect during it later in this video. Now, until the release of the Pixar Paw 3950 and 3970 series sensors, there wasn't any way for users to adjust their sensors angling without the use of third-party programs like Accel. But on these more modern sensors, they do support sensor tilting on the mouse itself, removing the need for third-party software, but not all mice that use these sensors have sensor tilting enabled, so you'll need to check and see if this feature has been enabled on your mouse. You can do this by checking the mouse's product page or software. On Razer's mice, for example, this feature is called rotation, but on other manufacturers' mice it'll be called sensor rotation or sensor angling, but regardless of the naming, this feature will do the same thing. And if your mouse doesn't have a sensor tilt setting enabled, rest assured you can use Accel to tilt your mouse's sensor, and since this feature is gaining popularity, many brands are enabling sensor tilting post-launch, so make sure to update your mouse's firmware whenever there are updates, as more brands are adopting this very underrated feature. But it is worth noting that if you're using a Logitech mouse, as recording this video, none of their mice support on-device sensor tilting as they use their own in-house sensors, not Pixar series SKUs. Hopefully in the future Logitech does implement this feature on their mice, but for now you have to use a third-party program like Accel to utilize a sensor tilt on Logitech's mice and any other mice that don't currently support sensor tilting. Now, while both the Pixar Paw 3950 and 3970 series sensors do support on-device sensor tilting, depending on the sensor type you have inside your mouse, there will be a slight difference in the tilt range. As on the Pixar 3950 series SKUs, the sensor is adjustable by 30 degrees both positively and negatively, whereas on the Pixar 3970 series SKUs, the range is slightly higher, being adjustable by 44 degrees both positively and negatively. Now, generally speaking, most grip angles will be between a positive or negative 8-degree range, but if your grip angle is higher than the supported tilt range on your mouse's sensor, you can use Accel as a workaround, as it doesn't have a tilt limit and will override any limitations from a sensor's onboard tilt range. Now, the easiest way to find your grip angle is to use a very helpful tool designed by Razer called Mouse Rotation Calibration, which you can use to get an estimate of your grip's natural angle, and a link to this tool will be linked in the video description. Now, from my experience, the best way to use this tool is to lower your mouse's DPI to 400 so you don't draw outside the tracking window, and it also helps to do this test with your eyes closed so you don't visibly try and straighten your movements, so you get the most natural data possible. Also, make sure that Enhanced Pointer Precision is disabled in Windows mouse settings, as that can affect this test as well. But with those parameters in mind, put your mouse inside the box, left click, and move your mouse side to side horizontally at least 10 times. Once done, note the angle that you get and repeat the calibration 5 to 10 more times, then take all the results, average them out, and round them up or down depending on the decimal value. Then take your finalized value, open your mouse's software, and somewhere inside there will be an option for sensor tilt, as long as your mouse supports it, that is. For Razer's mice, for example, it's under the Advanced tab, and once you find it, you can input your finalized angle. Now, if you're going to use Accel to tilt your sensor, all you need to do is open up the program and look in the rotation box here, input your grip angle, and then hit apply. Put your mouse's DPI back to its desired value, and then you can start testing your aligned sensor angle. However, it's very important to note that while Razer's tool is very useful, since it runs in a web browser, there can be some slight inaccuracies with it, so I'd recommend double checking the tilts by repeating the paint test we did earlier, and double check that horizontal or vertical movements are even with the respective axes. If you feel like the sensor tilt isn't aligned properly or notice it's a little off, feel free to adjust it as needed. Just make sure you keep the values within 1 to 2 degrees of the average value so you're not over or under adjusting your sensor. Also, another very important note here, keep in mind that your mouse's sensor position, shape, and your specific grip style on a mouse will cause your grip angle to shift from mouse to mouse. So if you switch mice or use multiple mice, I'd recalibrate your sensor tilt for each mouse you use. Personally speaking, on the ergonomic Death Adder V4 Pro, I use a -6-degree tilt, while on the symmetrical Viper V3 Pro I use a -4-degree tilt, so make sure to recalibrate your sensor's tilt from mouse to mouse. Now, as I mentioned earlier, using a sensor tilt will initially significantly impact your performance, as suddenly you won't have to physically counteract an unangled sensor, which after doing so for almost 20 years in my case had some negative impacts until I got accustomed to it. Now, the time frame for one to get fully acclimated to a sensor tilt will vary from user to user, and will vary depending on the size and shape of your mouse, the size and style of your grip, your natural grip angle, and how long you've been using your mouse with its unaligned sensor. Personally speaking, since I've been using unaligned sensors for almost 20 years now, now. It took me about 3 months to get accustomed to the sensor tilt, but since I review peripherals, I change my mouse every couple of weeks, so I'm not exactly a normal use case, but if I have to give a rough estimation, I'd say that most users will have an acclimation period of around 3 to 6 weeks, which may seem like a long time, but again, consider you're essentially relearning how to aim. Now, the inconsistency during this acclimation period isn't caused by the calibrated sensor angle per se, it'll more so be due to you unconsciously compensating despite the calibrated sensor tilt, which isn't exactly surprising considering you have to undo years and years of muscle memory, so during this acclimation period you'll likely experience uneven tracking, wobbly aim, as well as some other detriments, as you have to essentially relearn how to aim with this tilted sensor. Now, during this acclimation period, I'd highly recommend using the mouse as much as possible for general use, and I would avoid using any mice with a non-calibrated sensor during this time. I'd also highly recommend using an aim trainer like Kovacs or Aim Labs, and focus on playing scenarios that require consistent, even horizontal and vertical aiming to speed up this acclimation period, but I would limit the amount of aim training you do during this time, as if you do too much, specifically in the early stages, you could potentially cause strain damage to your hand since you're so dramatically changing how you aim, so be sure to pace yourself, especially during the first 1 to 2 weeks. I'd also highly recommend staggering the degree of your sensor's tilt, especially if you've never used a sensor tilt before or have a very aggressive grip angle, and you could do this by starting off with a 1 degree tilt and gradually increasing the tilt of the sensor every 7 days until you reach your calibrated grip angle. But it's very important to only increase the tilt every 7 days, as you need to give yourself plenty of time to get accustomed to the sensor tilt, especially if you've never used one before. If you speed up this process or jump to your full sensor tilt right away, you could not only make your acclimation period much longer, you could also injure your hands, so it's important to be patient during this time so you give yourself plenty of time to get acclimated to your calibrated sensor tilt, and remember that you have to essentially relearn how to aim, which is a process I would not recommend speeding up. But while this process is long, the end result is well worth it, as once you get accustomed to the calibrated sensor tilt, your aiming consistency, accuracy, and ergonomics will all improve to the point where going back to a mouse with an uncalibrated sensor feels like going back to the Stone Age, and once you feel how inconsistent and awful aiming with an uncalibrated sensor feels, you won't want to go back. The best way I can describe how impactful the sensor tilt feature is imagine your entire life you've worn your shoes on the wrong foot, but since everyone else does this as well, you've just adapted to wearing your shoes that way. But this sensor tilt feature is so impactful, it's like wearing your shoes on the right foot, and while it's different from what everyone else does, and while it will take time to get accustomed to walking this way, so to speak, in the long term it's better in every way, and that's how much of a difference this sensor tilt feature makes in my opinion based on my personal experience. Speaking of personal experience, in preparation for this video, I've been testing sensor tilting for almost 6 months now across 12 or so different mice, and the improvements I've seen from it are quite literally night and day, as not only has my aim gotten much more consistent and accurate, my ergonomics have improved significantly. Of course, there was about 2 months where I felt like I couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, but once I got fully acclimated to my calibrated sensor tilt, it was well worth it, and the benefits of this are so impactful. I've noticed just how awful aiming is with an unaligned sensor, so I've started to use Accel to tilt every mouse I use. I even use the tilt on the mouse used for work and editing, as the improved ergonomics massively help to reduce the frequency of straining issues with my hands, which commonly happen when I would edit my longer videos. So speaking from an ergonomic point of view, the calibrated sensor tilt is absolutely worth it, and the performance benefits you get from it are just icing on the cake, so to speak, from my experience. And as the last note, I wanted to mention that using a sensor tilt could be beneficial for all aim styles and all grip types. So regardless of your aim style, be it left or right-handed, wrist or arm dominant, or a hybrid of the two, and all grip styles, be it fingertip, claw, palm, or any subgenre or a hybrid of the above, utilizing a sensor tilt can be very beneficial, so I'd highly recommend experimenting with this feature regardless of your aim or grip style. And even if you think you don't have a tilted grip, I'd still recommend at least checking to see what your grip angle is, as you'd be surprised how many people actually have a tilted grip despite their wrist angle and mouse angle looking very similar. And it's also worth noting that sensor tilting can also accommodate some more unique grip styles, for example even very unique styles where the mouse is held at an extreme angle very deeply in the hand, or with whatever unique grip style you can imagine, you can align the sensor with this sensor tilt feature. But to do so you'll likely need to utilize raw Accel if the grip's angle is very aggressive, but it'll still be beneficial regardless. So even if you use a very unique grip style, I'd still highly recommend trying out sensor tilting, as it vastly improves a mouse's compatibility with more unique grip styles. Alright, and with that, that's everything you need to know about sensor tilting, one of the most underrated features you'll find on many modern gaming mice, and the best way to fix how you've been aiming incorrectly your entire life. I hope this guide was helpful and explained how to properly tune and use the sensor tilt feature. I know the time to get accustomed to this feature is quite long, but it's well worth it in the long run with all of its benefits, and I hope this video inspires you all to test out the sensor tilt feature as it's a very underrated feature, and if you do, be sure to let me know down in the comments how your experience has been, and if you have any specific questions about sensor tilting, leave a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer any questions you may have. Also, as a quick note here, I mentioned Accel several times in this video. This program is an official and safe to use program, and the driver has been signed, meaning it'll be compatible with most anti-cheats. However, occasionally it can be false flagged, but this is a pretty rare occurrence. So if you have to use Accel to utilize a sensor tilt on your mouse, you can do so without any downsides, and I'll have the official Accel website linked down in the video description for you all. But that's everything for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more guide videos like this one, as well as some in-depth peripheral reviews and teardowns, be sure to leave a like on this video and get subscribed to the channel. And if you'd like to support my efforts here on the channel with these guide videos, all my in-depth product reviews, and the teardown project, consider becoming a channel member, as that is the best way to directly support my efforts here on the channel, and being a channel member also gives you early access to all upcoming content here on the channel. But that's all for today, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Peace.